But in class yesterday, we started looking at utility stitches and what are they. So a utility stitch is a stitch that performs a function or it performs a task. So in this sense, we think about, we've got our fabric. The fabric's got a raw edge. I'm looking at some fabric here. I've got a piece of fabric here. We can clearly see it's got a raw edge. How are we going to prevent that raw edge? How are we going to prevent this fabric from fraying? So the way that we're going to prevent that fabric from fraying is by sewing a specific functional stitch that will stop the fabric from fraying. So things like a straight stitch, we're going to hold seams together with that. A zigzag is about, as we talked about, stopping this fabric from fraying, but it also could be used as a decorative stitch as well. And I would like you to research the different stitches. This column, it talks about the name of the stitch, we think about the purpose, and also some extra notes which might be the length of the stitch, if you used a different sewing machine foot, all those things that might be helpful for you when you're looking at stitches later on. Utility seams. And utility seams, just like stitches, perform a specific function. So if you're thinking about it, an open seam, which is where you will sew two pieces of fabric together and you will press them open and nice and flat. Where do we see an open seam? On the inside of a jacket. If you remove some of the lining, you'll be able to see an open seam. And later on in this video, I will demonstrate an open seam. So there are a couple of different seams here on the second sheet that I asked you to be able to research these different types of seams so that you've got an understanding on the description or the purpose of the seam and also some notes. So as I demonstrated each of the seams, I also asked you to take notes. You then went and sat at your desk and you made samples. So use the sheet as guidance to help you be able to add notes on the samples that you're going to stick into your sketchbooks. You could write your notes on the sheet. You could also write them in the sketchbook. It's entirely up to you. So for the second part of this video, I'm now going to demonstrate how to make the seams that we made in class, just as a reminder so you've got it for yourself. So I've got two examples here. And the first thing that I did was I gave everybody a piece of this. It's a very lightweight, I would say it's probably like a polycotton. And I said to everybody, we're going to make a functional stitch. And that functional stitch is going to be a zigzag stitch. So everybody set their machines and they made a zigzag stitch. And it's quite a narrow zigzag stitch because this is a lightweight fabric. I also gave everybody a heavier weight fabric, this one being an interior fabric. And I asked you all to make a functional stitch being a zigzag stitch so that you can see the difference of how the stitches perform. So if I zoom out, what you can notice is from the lighter weight fabric, you can sort of see where it's puckered slightly, it's lifted up, it's not straight. You can see the tension of the way that it's made the stitch here. And what it's done is it's wrapped the threads around. That's lifted the fabric. So probably what you would have had to do here is you might have needed to increase the stitch length here, you know, but it is about being able to compare the different ones so that you can understand the difference of what happens if you use the same stitch but on different types of fabrics. So the second way to make this stitch, so I've measured 1 centimetre in and I've drawn a line all the way along using my tailor's chalk. And then what I have done is on the opposite side of the line closest to the raw edge, I have used my zigzag stitch. So I've zigzagged on the opposite side of the line all the way along, and then I have cut close to the zigzag stitch, and I will zoom in so that you can see this nice and clearly. So that shows you there are two ways to make the same stitch. Experiment to see if your machine will create the stitch on the very edge, or do you have to do it the second way? Why were we experimenting? So that it tells us a little bit about the capabilities of our machine, and also it gives you a chance to be able to see the different effects of the same stitch. So I've also got a different sample here, and this different sample is an overlock stitch. Utility seams. So the first seam that we have on our utility seam worksheet is an open seam. So we're going to make an open seam, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I've got 2 pieces of fabric. I'm going to measure 1.5 centimeters, and I'm going to draw a straight line all the way across. So this line will be my guideline that I will use later on. I treat each piece separately. So what I'm going to do is I am going to zigzag all the way along one side of my sample piece. So here you can see I have zigzagged on the edge of one side of each piece of my sample. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my samples on top of each other, so that the zigzag pieces meet. I've already drawn a straight line, and that's 1.5 centimeters in. And then what I would like you to do is we're going to back stitch, we're going to sew all the way along, and we're going to back stitch at the end. So here's my sample piece. What I did was I back stitched. You can see where I've sewn, and I back stitched at the end. I've got a few stray fibres. All I'm doing is I'm cutting the fibres off, but I know the fabric won't fray because I have protected it with this zigzag stitch. And then what you're going to do is you're going to open the seam, and you're going to finger press it flat. Not to cut this seam down. Each of my squares they're about 12 centimeters square. So I would like you to make your samples and not cut them down, because we need them to be a decent sized sample for the awarding body to be able to look at. So this one is your open seam. That's the closed seam. An open seam, the 2 raw edges are open flat. We also started to look at some more creative seams. So the first creative seam we looked at was the French seam. We also looked at a flat felled seam. So if you look at an average pair of jeans, this is what a flat fell seam looks like. That's the inside of the of what would be your jeans, or the wrong side of the fabric. This is the front of the fabric, and what's happening here is the 2 pieces are stitched wrong side together. The bottom of the seam of one piece of the fabric is narrowed, and then what we do is we decide which is going to be our top piece, and it's folded over. And as it's folded over, it's then pinned, and it's created, or we've got this top stitch that goes along the top, and it creates what looks like a double stitch. The third seam that we briefly looked at was a welt seam. So we're going to make a French seam next. Here's an example of a French seam. So this would be the front of the fabric, and what I've done is I've made half of the seam, the other half I have left with the raw edges so it's showing, so that I'm able to re-walk myself through how I did the process. You could do the same thing if you find it helpful. Like I said, this is the front, this is the back or the wrong side. And the nice thing is with a French seam that the raw edge is enclosed in the seam allowance, and then the seam would be laid to one side, and we would continue the process of making the garment. You tend to find French seams on the side seams because it means that they would lay nice and flat against the skin, And you would find them on more on more couture garments. For this sample, I've got 2 pieces of lightweight denim style fabric. It's actually chambray from Trago Mills, good old Trago Mills. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a look at them to see if I've got a straight edge on both of them. Don't think I have. I am just going to create myself a nice straight edge on the fabric to start with. So I've got my 2 pieces of fabric. I've got a nice straight edge. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I want them wrong sides together. So we can see this is the wrong side being the plain. This is the right side. So I've got them wrong sides together. I'm just going to turn them round because I'm left-handed. It's easier for me. Going to get my trusty ruler. And my seam allowance is going to be 1.5 centimetres. And I'm drawing a straight line all the way 1.5 centimetres in from my nice raw edge, drawing the line all the way down. I'm also going to pin this line to keep the 2 pieces of fabric together. Where I pin is where I'm going to sew. I'm just going to open out my sample so that you can see we've got the 2 raw edges together. Just there. I'm going to close my sample. What I'm going to do, I am going to reduce the width of this seam. Sorry, the area in between the raw edge and my stitch line. This is the seam allowance. And this is the area I'm going to reduce the width. So I'm reducing the width 1 centimetre. I don't want there to be lots of bulk. And that's the reason why I'm doing that. But I've cut it down to reduce the width as we talked about. I'm going to open it out. I'm going to open the seam out. We talked about finger pressing the seam open. We talked about that. Then you will iron the seam open. You'll also lay the opposite way around. You will iron the seam open again. And we talked about that because we want to make sure that the seam is nice and flat. Then we're going to turn it over and we are going to iron the seam all to one side. And the final step that we're going to do, iron the whole sample. And the reason that we do all those steps is so that we can make sure that we have the seam exactly where we want it and we can feel the seam. And we're not creating any extra folds in the fabric either. So we talked about the purpose of a French seam. It's about enclosing this raw edge inside the fabric so that when we open it out, it's hidden. And to do that, I need to know where the raw edge finishes. So I can feel a little bump if I run my finger along. I can feel a little bump of where the raw edge is. And what I'm doing is I'm drawing some little dash lines and that'll tell me where to sew. So if you run your finger along, you'll be able to feel the raw edge and then you draw your dash line just on the outside of the raw edge. And where your dash lines are is where you're going to sew. So if we have a look, we can see where my stitch lines are. And then if we open the fabric out, the raw edge is completely hidden inside the fabric. You see there, it's completely hidden. And if we look at the opposite side, the raw edge is actually hidden inside this seam. So we're going to make one more seam. And this is where we got up to in the class. We made a flat fell seamed sample. And quite a few of you were wearing jeans and you had a look to be able to compare so that you could understand the process of how the flat fell seam comes together. So let's do that. Same thing again. I've got 2 pieces of fabric here. You can see. And what I've done, I have got the wrong sides together, measured 1.5 centimetres. So just so you can see that. Drawn a mark, pinned it, stitched that mark. And that's the point that we're up to now. Same thing as always. I talk about opening the seam. Finger press the seam open. Finger press it open. Iron the back of it as well. Turn it to the front. Close the seam. Lay it over to one side. Most important thing, what we're going to do is we've got the top of the seam. We also have the bottom of the seam. Doesn't matter which side you decide is the top or the bottom. The most important thing that the bottom is the one that you're going to reduce. So I'm turning it round. I've got my ruler. And it's only one side that I'm going to reduce. And I'm going to draw myself a line. In this case, I'm drawing a pencil line. So I know I am reducing the bottom seam allowance, which is here, by 1 centimetre. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a pair of scissors just to narrow it. So we have one seam allowance, which is bigger than the other. The top is bigger than the bottom. I'm going to spin my sample round so this makes sense. And the reason that we have that is because the top one is going to fold over the bottom one. And I'm going to pin it. So I'll do it again. The top folds over the bottom and pin. And I will lay it flat and I will check, and I will also iron it in place so that it's not moving. So my pins are right on the edge of that fold, and where I pin is where I'm going to sew. You can see here where I've top stitched because I've purposely done it in a different colour. But what I've also done is I've left the bottom of the seam open just so that I can look back and remind myself, you know, how I got here. So hopefully that was helpful for you. What I'd like you to do is go through the worksheets that we had together, the utility seams and utility stitches, complete the samples, and also write the notes, and make sure you write the notes either on the sheet or in your sketchbook so that you've got them together as a really good reminder how you got here. And I will see you after the holidays in Falmouth at 6 o'clock as normal for week 3. So thanks for listening and bye for now.